morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is David Waldron. I am the marketing manager at QAI Laboratories. It is a pleasure to welcome you on this exciting webinar where we are going to dive deep into carbon footprint certification. At QAI, we are dedicated to providing testing, inspection, and certification solutions and insights to help you stay ahead in the industry. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker, Denice Staaf, who is a renowned sustainability expert, author, and educator. Today, Denice will be discussing how carbon footprint certification can help building products manufacturers reduce carbon footprint and meet environmental laws. This session will be recorded and we will share with the attendees. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Denice Staaf.
Thank you, David. Hello to everyone. My name is Denice Staaf, and I work in sustainability. The company is called Labeling Sustainability, and we work with building material manufacturers on all of the different types of transparency. I have been lead AP for, let's just say, a very long time. So I'm well versed in the standards as well as what you need as a building materials manufacturer, and also now with the new building regulations that are coming out, which we will talk about. So I will stop a couple of times for questions. Sorry, I don't know why it didn't want to forward. So you can put them in the chat for David, or you can hold them until I stop for questions, but I will do it several times during the presentation, because I feel like there are a few things here that I need to make sure that everybody is clear on before we move on, okay? So I am hoping to help you today get a little bit more understanding. Even if you don't grasp everything, just keep an open mind, and you can always watch it later. Or you can always follow up with questions. I'll have my email at the end. We can definitely go forward. So the current situation for legislation and regulation of building materials is, by clean laws, executive orders. But right now, we started compiling a list, and the list is about 134 lines long. So it's broken. We've broken it by state. This is just a screenshot of it, but by state, by product. What's happening in all over the United States, and actually it's happening beyond the US, but we're going to pretty much talk about domestic stuff to the US today, but it's happening everywhere. And it's happening with a wide variety of products, although we are going to focus on some core and shell. Know that what we're talking about works for everyone, and also know that core and shell products are what we're talking about right now, and what there are, thresholds for right now. But the US government gave about, 200 million, 2 billion, a crazy amount of money to understand the carbon footprint, the embodied carbon in a building. That's their goal. Their goal is, at the end of a project, to have a number for not only what that project cost, but what is the carbon in that project? And then to, over time, make that lower and lower and lower. In order for that to happen, eventually every product will need to have an EPD, not just the few products that they're starting with. We got to start somewhere. We got to create systems. So they picked some of the highest embodied carbon products to start with, but that's not forever. And so even if your product is not on this list, know that it is coming. It's not that you're going to get a free pass forever, okay? So think about that when you are looking at all of this. So I'm going to go over a few terms that I want everybody to be clear on to start with, because you're going to hear me say them. You're going to see them every bit. Where, what is embodied carbon? Embodied carbon is also interchangeable with carbon footprint. You'll see sometimes you'll read an article and it'll talk about the embodied carbon of the product. Sometimes you'll talk about what is the carbon footprint of the product. So the embodied carbon is the global warming potential. It's an impact factor that is measured in CO2 equivalent of a product. Now that is calculated for the greenhouse gas emissions resulting from extracting raw materials, transporting, and manufacturing at a minimum. Sometimes they add use phase, sometimes they add disposal phase, but typically in building products, at a minimum is what we call A1 to A3. A1 being raw materials, A2 being transportation of those raw materials to the manufacturing facility, and A3 being manufacturing. So the amount of CO2 equivalent in all of that is what is the carbon footprint or the embodied carbon. So you add them all up, and that's the term that they're using. And you'll also see GWP, you'll see CO2 EQ, which is CO2 equivalent. So all of these together are the number that they're looking for. And the lower, the better. Okay.
So, Denice, sorry
yes.
to interrupt. Your slides, I don't know if you should present them
not showing up
or not yet. Yeah, they are not showing up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. A lot of this made more sense. Okay, so this slide made more sense if you could see it. Somehow it must have shut off. I apologize. So this is what I was talking about, the different states, the different jurisdictions. We've been compiling lists of the current situation for the products and the legislation or executive order. Embodied carbon, we just discussed that. And now we're going into an EPD. So how do we get that GWP impact factor? How do we get that CO2 equivalent number that is the carbon footprint? Well, the easiest way, well, actually, the standard way, not the easiest, but the standard way is to use an EPD. EPD is a type 3 environmental product declaration that follows a life cycle analysis methodology. I always say this. The life cycle, the LCA, that's the science. The EPD is the marketing document. The EPD is the document that you put out there. But the LCA is the methodology, is the science on how you do that. Now, one of the impact factors that it reports on is the CO2 equivalent. It also reports on things like fresh water use. It reports on smog creation. It reports on other things, but the most important one, the number that everyone cares about, is the GWP. Now, the difference between an LCA and an EPD is this. An EPD follows what's called a product category rule, which is the rules for that product category for doing the life cycle and how you set up the report. Now, why do you need a product category rule if you already have a life cycle methodology? I'll give you an example. In life cycle, the person who's doing it gets to make a lot of decisions. What they want the declared or functional unit to be, what do they want, how long do they want it, if it has a service life, all of these things. And because of that, even if you've got different same product, you could have very different life cycles. I always use the example of a water bottle. So if you think of a water bottle, many of us are thinking very different water bottles. So one water bottle, the LCA, maybe the bottle and the wrapper and the plastic cap and the ring around the plastic cap. And the next person does a water bottle and they said, well, it doesn't have a wrapper or a plastic ring. It's printed on. And it's, just the plastic, the cap, and the printing. And the next person says, well, my bottle's glass. So how do you create a somewhat standard methodology for all three of those? And that's what is a PCR. So the PCR, the product category rule, sets in that product category the requirements, the guidelines for how you're going to make those decisions. And it'll put similar products together, okay? So typically, a product category is a group of products that the products have an equivalent function. There's one for resilient flooring. There's one for all other flooring that may be different than what's in the resilient flooring. So there's lots of different product category rules. And it allows you to make EPDs somewhat comparable There's still a lot of rules about comparing them, but it makes them very comparable. Okay, so here's some examples of some PCRs that are used. These are typical in the buy clean legislations. So these are very typical. There's one for structural steel. There's one for mineral wool board insulation, flat glass, and concrete. What you'll notice is they're called Part B, most of them. And why they're called Part B is because in the US, Canada, Mexico, Latin America, actually most places outside of Europe and Australia, we use ISO 21930 as the base PCR. It is the general one. And the more specifics about that product is called Part B. So ISO 21930 is for building materials and construction works. And so that will be Part A. And then Part B will be what's specific about that product category. There's no reason to recreate the whole wheel. We're only going to recreate just for that category. So that's why you'll see a lot of times written Part B. Okay. So let's talk about who is setting thresholds, who is asking for EPDs, who is really, what are they saying, and how are they drawing the guidelines? Now, your product may not be on here and you still may be asked for EPDs. You may not even be a traditional building material and you may still be asked for EPDs on government projects, on state projects, or even local jurisdiction projects. Some GCs that I've seen or project owners have said, you know what, not just these products, all products. If you want to be on this job, you have an EPD. Now, why would they even do that? Beyond just really understanding, they want to screen out. I always say I worked for product manufacturers for many years. And when I was in that field, the majority of product manufacturers were the manufacturers. Once in a while, you would have some distributor reps running around, but for the most part, it was the manufacturer out talking about their product. I would say that's not the majority of the case now. You can bring things in from all over the world, put your name on them, and market them. And so what more and more architects and general contractors really want to work with is they want to work with the top tier of that. So it's fine that you're bringing it in and putting your name on it, you're not truly the manufacturer. But if so, I only want to deal with the top tier of those. So they're kind of using transparency documentation as a screener for making sure that they're dealing with the best companies in the business. So who's setting the thresholds is a GSA. So any building the government owns, the Federal Highway Administration, civil works projects, and the EPA. The EPA has got like everybody else. And the EPA's got some background documents that feed into the GSA and the FHWA. States, lots of states, as you saw from that. I'm going to highlight California just because I'm super familiar with that one. But there are lots of states. Colorado has one that is somewhat similar to California. So there's lots and lots of states. And then local jurisdictions. There are New York has some jurisdictional requirements out there. But I am going to highlight Marin County just again, because I happen to know it really well. So if you're in the federal and you're GSA, this is the one that is the furthest along for the government, the federal government. The federal government GSA set up a pilot project. And of this pilot project, they were looking to procure low embodied carbon materials. They identified what you're going to see. They identified those materials, and now they're looking at where, who is going to be able to provide those, how the specifics of getting those low carbon materials, and what are they covering? Steel, concrete, flat glass, and asphalt. Those are the products that they were actually interested in. Actually, let me stop at this point. And David, do you have any questions in the chat? I can't really see it.
Yes, Tanner was asking if the list is public. So this question was asked when you presented the spreadsheet.
Oh my goodness. We have been compiling that information. It is public information, but that list is something we're compiling and we're keeping track of. There isn't a 100% public list. No, there's not. And that spreadsheet, William, thank you, is painstakingly following those regulations. So no public list that I know of.
Okay, and yeah,
Any
that's
others?
the only question so far.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? All right, we'll move on. So where did the EPA get this idea, or the GSA get these, what is low embodied carbon? So where did they get the idea of what's low embodied carbon, right? Because it's one thing to say it, but where did that idea come from? So it turns out the EPA has an interim determination, and they're calling substantially lower means that your global warming potential is the best performing. So you are in the top 20%, meaning 20% of the lowest, or lowest 20% in the embodied carbon greenhouse gas emissions for your product when you compare similar products. So similar types of steel, similar strength class in concrete. So what you are is you're the lowest 20%. So that's considered low embodied carbon. If that is not available on a project, then they will take 40%. So you're better than, you're in the 40% low, or worst case scenario, they will take better than the industry average. And so when you have the GWP, they're calculating, and they're actually using EC3, I think, as what was the bottom 20 percentile of the materials. I think that they used their calculations. So when you look at concrete, you've got some determinations here. So you're looking at concrete. Is it made with qualifying cement? And we'll talk about that when we talk about cement. 80% of the assembly total cost or total weight comprised of materials that meet this requirement. So that's rebar reinforced concrete, where the concrete does not have an EPD, or it's impractical because maybe it's made special for that project and they couldn't get an EPD fast enough, although I don't know, but you're allowed to use a qualifying cement. And when we talk about cements, we'll talk about what qualifies as cement. So if you're curious to know what those thresholds look like, here's an example of the top 20%, the top 40%, and then better than average. So this is kilograms of CO2e per cubic meter of concrete, okay? And it's always using your type 3 environmental product declaration, and it's using your product category rule, as we saw in the very beginning. So it's simply a number. Where does your number fit for that mix? And that's how you fall. Okay. Now, this was a pilot project, and the pilot project is complete. And from what I understand, these threshold limits stay. They were feasible to work with. Now, you may or may not know, the majority of the GWP in concrete actually comes from cement. So now let's talk about the cement. So it did say on there, if you did not have an EPD for that cement, the concrete, that you could use cement that meets their threshold limits. So what is that threshold? So first of all, if you've got an EPD for that cement, here is the cement's threshold that you would be looking at meeting. And this is kilograms of CO2e per ton of cement. So better than average would be 858, top 40% would be 818, and top 20% would be 751, which is a really, really good number to be in that, top 20%. So these are the thresholds based on the cement EPD, which I spelled cement wrong. That's funny. Typo there. But what if think I took it off. What if your cement does not have an EPD? Then they go to an Energy Star program for cement facilities. And I didn't put it on here because it starts getting really complicated, but there is a way to still meet it. But the better thing would be to have an EPD of the cement, and even better would be the EPD of the concrete, so that you can automatically just put that through, right? So then you have CMUs, same thing. They are going to be types of manufactured concrete, can include brick, pavers, slabs, retaining walls, manufactured veneer stone, and concrete roof tiles. So CMUs actually are more than just, CMU that I would think of that you would just have a masonry unit. And they also have limits, kilograms CO2e per cubic meter manufactured. Then you get into steel, and steel one is going to be a little bit complicated because you've got manufactured, you've got fabricated and manufactured, you've got cold formed, you've got hot rolled steel. And so it has to do with not only the type of steel, if it's been fabricated, if it's a product. So now you need to know if your fabricated steel has product from the Buy Clean, and if it also originates from an Energy Star facility. So there's Energy Star for not only cement plants, but also steel plants. So we've got, rebar, hollow sections, cold formed, hot rolled, and all of the different types of steel that you can think of, both fabricated and unfabricated. Asphalt also has limits. It's got what I thought was the easiest to understand. It's just 1, 2, 3, you meet it, you don't meet it on asphalt. You've got flat glass. Now here's something interesting on the flat glass. The flat glass is actually the glass. It actually is not the unit, meaning it counts as the laminate interlayers, all of the glass, IGU, shading components, spacers, airspace, perimeter edge seals, none of that is included. What it's really just using is the glazing, the glass, not the assembly that goes with it. Is part of it. So adjacent materials are not part of the assembly, just the glass. So that was, and it's got its thresholds. So I thought it made it a little bit easier for now. And I always specify for now, because this is just the first trial, and not even trial, the first attempt at how we're going to roll out a bigger program. These problems are not just for products forever. And I really want to emphasize that, because some people think, well, I'm good, but you may not be good for very long, and you might as well now start getting started on it, so that by the time your category is up, then you're like, been there, done that. We're already, well down the road with what we have. So EPA also has a labeling program. They are modeling it after Energy Star and WaterSense, and their program does concentrate on the same 4, but it is expanding out. And the reason why they are focusing on endorsing PCRs is because they know it's beyond these 4 products. So if you've got furniture, if you've got wall tiles, if you've got, flooring, they need to make sure your PCR is in order, because EPDs are good for 5 years. So within 5 years, this is going to expand beyond these 4 products. So they want to make sure that the PCRs are producing good quality EPDs. Now, the Federal Highway Administration, they've got $2 billion available to state departments and the like to start figuring out how to procure low carbon materials as well. So they're also getting started. They're not as far along as the GSA, but they are getting started. Then you've got state, and state works a lot like the federal, pretty much the same: steel, concrete, glass, mineral wool. And what's interesting about the states is it's anything funded with tax dollars. And it's also any kind of project. So it's projects by the Department of Transportation is covered by the Department of Transportation. The Department of Corrections is covered by the Department of Corrections, Parks and Recreation. So all of these agencies are going to be in charge of their own projects. So in addition to the federal, who's in charge of federal projects, when you get to the state level, there's no overarching, the state whatever is going to cover it. What happens when you get to the state level is it could be any of these policing their jobs or being responsible for their jobs, right? So you've got a lot of different people with a lot of different resources or lack thereof that are all now trying to manage these buy clean legislation mandates for building projects. Okay. So for instance, California State University specifically said, we are not going to concentrate on anything under 10 million. If it's over 10 million, then that's it. We're going to put resources on it. Under 10 million, we're not. So everyone's kind of making their own thing and doing it their way. It's always to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions through supplier selection. And those are the ones that are currently regulated with their own thresholds. We don't have to go through them again. And then you get onto the local level. So this is where it starts getting all out the window, I think, because not only do you have the federal government who's got their list, then you've got the states, and you saw it could be any of the agencies in the states that are now in charge of their own buying. But now you've got local jurisdictions. So now you've got the city of Los Angeles, Berkeley, and Marin County. Marin County actually put it in their building code. So where are these guys listing it? What are the thresholds? When you get to the local jurisdiction, it gets a little more haphazard as to how that jurisdiction is doing it, how that city is doing it. I believe in Los Angeles as well, they're putting it in the green building code, but is that going to be the same code? Where does that go? Like, there's a lot more ambiguity in how these, and this is what I would say about certification overall. When you start looking at your carbon footprint, and I was just talking to someone yesterday, and we were talking about the state of specifications and how projects will pick building materials in the future. The future is, what is your GWP first? Then I'll look at all your stuff. But you tell me your GWP up front, right? What is your carbon footprint up front? That's going to be the determining factor. And then based on that bucket of people who fit my requirements, then I'm going to go to the next bucket. And below requirement, do you fit in that? Okay, now only you guys are in my bucket. And then I'll keep going down until I find that sweet spot where carbon footprint and all the specifications meet. That's where this is going. And I don't see any other way. I mean, I don't see like any other place that it's more important than at the local jurisdiction, right? So in Marin County, they put in their building code, they've got cement embodied carbon limits. So now if you want to do Marin County, which I believe is San Francisco, now when you want to do a project in that area, you've got to show your GWP, and you can either do it with your cement in pounds per yard, cubic yards. I don't deal with that one. That's how US cement and concrete manufacturers produce. Or you've got CO2 equivalents per cubic meter, which is typically more international way of doing it. And so you've got it right in the building code. Do you meet it or not? Because if you don't, you're out. Okay. So herein lies the problem. And this is what this certifying your carbon footprint was meant for. Who's policing this? I did talk to one organization, and I will not name any names, but they pretty much said, well, we get a summer intern, and that's who we think we're going to put on this and start training them how to do it. How much training did the person get? Do they really understand? And I'm not saying that, everybody's not going to understand. Some people will be very well versed in this, but you're leaving the ability of your product to be used on a job to the unknown. You've got all your documentation, you've got everything there, but what if they read it incorrectly? What if they don't take the right number? What if you get put out by accident? And by the time it gets to the agency level, it's already too late, right? So it went to the contractor, it went to the general contractor, and the general contractor's turning it into an agency. I mean, it's too late at that point. You need to catch it early. And so that's what they're looking at, screening them out earlier. And a lot of the agencies, I would say across the US, especially jurisdictional, local jurisdictions, how much resources are they going to have for this? So what you want to do is you want a slide through. Okay, this is guaranteed that I fit in these places that I'm going to be specified. It's already there. It's been certified. It's a pass through. It's okay. They're done. They don't have to do anything else on this, right? So what you're going to see next, we're going to stop for questions, but what you're going to see next is why is that even more important when you've got products where you're not sure? Because there's so many different levels, there's so many different thresholds, and you've got to take into all these considerations. Oh my goodness, it could be overwhelming beyond what jurisdiction are you in? Okay, what jurisdiction are you in? Okay, this is what I need. Okay, what state are you in? Okay, this is what I need. And you're just constantly back and forth and back and forth. Any questions, David?
Yes, we got a question from Cesar Garcia. So, is there any way to calculate CO2 EQ than the LCA?
No. Good question. So currently, right now, that is the accepted standard. Why? It's accepted because it's a methodology that's internationally accepted, but it's also third-party verified. And so it's not just, so when you do an EPD, you do an LCA, you put it in EPD format, you have them both third-party verified. So everything is, when you're talking about regulations and legislation based on a number, that needs to be third-party verified. In addition, this is why we're also proposing certification, because if you've done everything to this point, getting that absolutely certified is nothing compared to losing a job because somebody misread it. This is the only way currently. Now, there are talks, in the future, and I would say we're years away from this, having much more of for something like concrete, having an AI generator that's going to give you an easier way. But I think we're years from this. And in the US, I would say we're at least 5 years behind Europe in the way that we use this. Europe is much more advanced than us. They've been doing it a little longer. Their legislation and legislative push has been around longer. But now we're trying to catch up. This legislation is to get a catch up. And so no, an EPD third-party verified, not even an LCA, but an actual EPD third-party verified is the only current way to get your GWP, your carbon footprint number. Other questions?
No, that's everything so far.
Oh my goodness. Either I'm explaining this well or nobody wants to ask questions. Please. So let's talk about when you're looking at all of this legislation, and you've got a project and you're being specified and you are submitting your documentation, what are they looking for in almost all of these? So beyond the GWP, every single one of those is asking about what was your PCR? Okay. They're going to ask, are these third-party verified? When does it expire? What is the correct functional or declared unit? Is it manufacturer specific? Is it from the facility that we're getting it from? And did you use the correct PCR? So when you're looking at an EPD, let's look and see where you find these things. So if you wanted to figure out where somebody gave you this EPD for a product and you're looking at it to see if it complies, well, it's an environmental product declaration. It's according to the standard. It's for fabricated steel reinforcement. And then it's from the Concrete Reinforcing Steel Institute. This is not facility specific. This is called an industry average. So there are two types of product EPDs. There's one that is product specific, facility specific, and this is what is required. This product from this facility. You may make the same product at 4 facilities, but this is the GWP from this facility. Why this facility? Because your supply chain is coming from all over to this facility. So that calculates into it. Let's say you have a facility on the East Coast and the West Coast, and your raw material suppliers are on the West Coast. If your transportation figures highly into your product, then your West Coast location is going to have a better GWP than your East Coast location, okay? And that's just a very, very simple example. Now, industry average is when all of the manufacturers from a specific industry get together and decide they want to do one together and create an average profile for an industry average. So you can use that in LEAD for, I believe, half a point, that you contribute to half a point, but it is not used in any kind of buy clean or any kind of legislation. It needs to be facility specific, product specific. So you're going to look for, when you want to look at the EPDs, you're going to make sure there's a logo with the manufacturer's name. So when you're looking at the EPD, manufacturer specific, so you're going to look for a logo. You're going to look for a manufacturer's name. So on there, there'll be a declaration page. It'll talk about who the owner is, where the facility is, who the EPD program operator is, who did the LCA, when does it expire. It'll give you these, every EPD has one. It's either in the very beginning or the very end. And it will show you all of this information. So you want to know what facility it came from, and you want to know what manufacturer it came from. And in LEAD, because I've audited this, what has to happen is the specification, the invoice, and the EPD are going to need to match. Okay, so if you're OEMing this from someone, then you've got to get an EPD with your name on it, or you're going to have to write a letter disclosing who your manufacturer is so that they know to use that EPD. Okay. Then you need a functional or declared unit, and that's going to be here. Declared unit is cradle to gate, raw materials, A1, transportation, A2, manufacturing, A3. So that's called cradle to gate because it's at your gate waiting to be shipped. Cradle to grave is more of a functional unit. And that's all the way through the life cycle to delivered to the job site, to the use phase, to the service life, to what's done with it at end of life. That's the easiest way to kind of do it. And this is a declared unit. This does include fabrication because on all of the buy clean or federal mandates, they had a different number for fabrication or non-fabrication. So this will be fabrication. Is it valid? You're going to want expiration date. PCR used. Every single one of those wants to tell you what PCR has to be used. Now, just so you know, there isn't another one if you had this type of product that you would typically use. So that's PCR is used. It's externally verified and the name of the verifier. So it gives you enough information. Like I said, you'll see this page at the very beginning, or some companies put it at the very end, but you'll be able to read everything about it and see if it complies. Oh, that I could have done it on the other slide, but I didn't. Okay, so now when you look at the threshold, this is where it gets a little interesting and a little confusing. And this is where certification will really help. So if I look at the end of this EPD, so this is a structural steel product produced at a specific mill. Now what I have to do is look at what they did. So I need a threshold number. Remember in the very beginning, we talked about a threshold. It's 1,285 for fabricated steel of this type of steel. I'm just pulling that number out of the air. But now look at how the EPD is reported. So it's reported GWP, right? GWP, metric ton of CO2 EQ. This is what we want. It's breaking it up in A1, A2, A3. So now we got to add all three of those up to get to our number. And we've got to make sure it's declared unit. So they made it even more confusing because they say results for declared unit. Now you've got to go back to that main page. What was the declared unit? And then you always want it to be per Tracy. This is the US EPA's threshold, the GWP, that matches that. And so they're giving it to you this way. So now someone has to add that up, check on the declared unit, and make sure now they've got to compare this number. And is this number per metric ton, per kilogram, or whatever? And they've got to do all the conversions to match it to the regulation. Who's doing that again? Who's going to be responsible for the math? How much of this do they know? Do they understand where to get all the information? You can see how now you're relying on an external source to get it right. And this means whether or not you could be on a project. So when it's certified, it already comes in as, yep, this is the threshold number. It meets this jurisdiction and it's been certified. So that's one example there of how things can start getting a little gray for some. So this is doing the math. So this is what it turned out to be. This was, I had checked on the threshold. It's per metric ton of fabricated steel, per metric ton of fabric. Okay, it passes, right? But what did I have to do to get there? I had to do quite a few steps. So that's where things can get a little gray. So this is what certification was made for. It's made for an automatic pass through that. Where is your PCR correct? Is your declared or functional unit correct? If it's in a broken out A1 to A3, that's pretty common without a totaling. I don't like to show it that way, but some people do. And so add it up. What does it equal? How does it compare? Is there a compliance or no compliance? You're not requiring or relying on somebody else reviewing it. You are sure when you submit that paperwork that they can read right on the cover page that this is our number, this is the threshold that's required, here's the certification that we are passed, and behind it would be the EPD of that you've had done. Now let's talk about that process a little bit. So how does the certification work? So there's two paths to come in for certification. One would be you already have an EPD from someone did it. And then you would get all your documentation reviewed. Somebody would sign off on it, and then you could be certified. If you don't have an EPD, that's okay too. You go out to a party to do the EPD, then you come back into the certification system, and it goes the same way. So even if you don't have an EPD, that's fine. You can still get certification. We just have to do an extra step. We have to send you out to get an EPD and all of that, and then come back in for certification. Now, with the certification, you are getting even more value because the EPD allows you to have a 10% variation over 5 years. So what happens if you change something, change a supplier, and it changes something in that EPD? Well, if it comes from our system, if it comes from this system where we've helped you get the EPD with an outside source and come in, you can get that edited, no problem, and get it put back in. If you had it done externally, you have to go back to the EPD provider that you used and find out what their rules are. But with this, you have a yearly audit that says, yes, our suppliers are still the same, or no, our suppliers are not the same. So you're rest assured that if you are making changes, that you can actually get credit for those in some instances, because obviously you want a lower and lower number. One of the things about an EPD, I always tell clients is, this is the most powerful document a manufacturer can have. I can tell you where you can save money, you can be more efficient simply by looking at your EPD. Why? Because every time you spend money on energy, whether it's diesel, electricity, natural gas, or propane, you are taking money away from your bottom line. And if you make things more efficient and you don't spend that money, that's more profit for the company overall. So in addition to being a powerful document for specifications, for all of that, an EPD is an incredibly powerful document for you as the manufacturer. You can find your hotspots, you can find your issues. I had a manufacturer one time that had 12% of their product's impact was from packaging. It's typically 2%. They had 12. What did that tell them? They need to rethink their packaging because they are sending a lot of money out the door to be thrown away, right? So it just gave them, whoa, we need to really rethink that. What can we save? What can we do? It's a hot spot diagram for you to figure out where you can save money, if anything else. So questions at this point, David?
Yes, we got a question from Robert Tolento. So how do you get an EPD on products that come from China?
Well, we ask a lot of questions. You can do it. We could talk offline, but you would have to, do you bring them in and fabricate them, package them, cut them, do anything to them in a US warehouse? Or is it everything in China? That would be the first thing to know. And in China, then we would have to work with the manufacturer to get some primary data. Now, what do I mean by primary data? So when you're doing an EPD or life cycle, which, the life cycle behind it, a certain percent of the impact impact metrics, I should say, should be primary information. And primary information means direct information. So I want to know how much electricity, how much natural gas, what propane, where do the raw materials come from? What is the bill of materials for that product being made? So those need to be primary information. So you have to work with the factory to get it. I do have people that do it. I have people who have gotten information from manufacturers in South Korea, from China, from Turkey. It does happen. So that's what they do. We just have to get involved and work with them. But you can get an EPD, sure, with your name on it. Next question.
Nope, those are all the questions.
Okay. So with all of this legislation, buy clean or otherwise, they're enforcing thresholds for materials for the GWP. We saw that in concrete and structural steel and flat glass. But as I keep saying, that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story. We're in like the introduction. We haven't even gotten to chapter 1 yet. We are in the very, very, very beginning because, as I said, the U.S. government in the Inflation Reduction Act spent like $200 billion. It wasn't million, I think it was billion, trying to figure out how to create lower carbon building materials. for that kind of money, we're not going to stop at concrete and flat glass. And on the, some of the states don't, and some of the other ones have other products. And there's going to be more added all the time. I listened to a lecture one time from someone who was involved in the Buy Clean, and they originally thought every year they would start figuring out what products to add, but implementation has been a little slower. But they're thinking like an every year calendar, where every year they would issue a new list of products that are added to that. So that it's just the beginning. And these, regulations are putting the responsibility for gathering compliant manufacturers on the project teams, right? They're now the checkers. But that works great in some instances, but we've all worked on projects where there is not enough resources to go around. So you're relying on very sparse resources to determine if your product is available. And as more and more jurisdictions are coming on board every month, this is becoming more and more and more of a forefront for manufacturers, where if you do all of the work in advance, you want to make sure you don't lose that job, or you are not, ineligible for an error. So everything about certification just drives in that you're just like, next, okay, this one's good, next, this one's good, next, where there isn't this, okay, let me get my checklist out. Let me make sure everything is exactly, oh, well, this one doesn't seem right. Let me add up that functional unit, declared unit. Let me do all of this. It's just a pass through. And that's it. Thank you all for your time. I hope you learned something today. Oh, I wanted to give you, I'm going to leave this up one more second, and I will give you.
There's some more questions.
Oh, perfect. I'll give you my email address as well on here. If you've got any questions, let me turn this back on. Sorry. I can't see anybody, so that's why I shut that off, because I couldn't see anybody.
Question from
There.
Colin.
Sure.
We make a lot of custom windows. For example, our glazing can be sourced locally or from overseas, depending on performance requirements. Do each of your suppliers need EPDs too? Can we have a document that is more fluid to be completed depending on the specifications of the package?
No. So you're going to have to prove where your glass came from, and your suppliers will have to have EPDs for that glass. There's not a fluid one size catches all. You're going to have one from each supplier. There is no way around that. There's no like, well, for this supplier, I'm going to put in this number. No, they've got to have their own EPDs with their number on it.
Okay. There is one more question from Cesar Garcia. As a general idea, is carbon footprint the result of the LCA CO2 EQ?
Yes. So it's the LCA is the science, as I said. So it's the methodology, it's the software, it's putting in all the information. The EPD is just the marketing document of how to display the results so that all of them look kind of similar. So with the LCA, that one of the impact factors, Tracy 2.1 is the US EPA's impact factors. For US products, you have to have a minimum of those on your EPD. And those would be, the color ozone, smog, acidification, eutrophication, and GWP. So GWP would be one of the impact factors, as you saw on this slide here, this GWP. This is one of the results. It would say ozone, and then it would say, eutrophication, acidification, and smog. These would be the impact factors in that category. And then you have other ones as well, depending on the product. So then you have those. So this is the results based on the LCA, but the EPD is what's telling you how to put it in this format.
Hi, my name is Jared Johnson. I'm the Director of Quality, Safety, and Customer Experience here at QAI. Thank you all for joining today. We are definitely happy to have you join us and learn about this. But one of the things that I think was missed in the presentation a little bit is that QAI offers an ISO IEC 17065 product certification. We're one of the new ones in the market, and so that we do offer that 17025 accreditation for your product, and so that's where the certification from QAI comes in.
Yes.
That we would certify that product to the jurisdiction, not just create the EPD, but we would create the EPD, and then we would certify that product to the jurisdiction. So that way, when it gets to the AHJ, they're not having to do the math. They're not having to do the calculations. They're not having to do, the review. It's already certified to their jurisdictional requirements.
Yes, and I probably didn't make that clear enough, Jared. Thank you for that clarification.
And there is also a question from Sarika. In one of the last slides under certification overview, it is mentioned not relying on an unknown party to review it. Can you please clarify that?
Oh, sure. When you're putting your documentation on a project, you're giving it to a contractor in a lot of cases, or sometimes you're submitting it yourselves to a general contractor on, let's say, a University of California project. Who's reviewing it? Do you know them? Do you have their email address? Can you ask them questions? Like, you have no idea. You're turning it in and you're blindly, someone's going to say yes or no if you can be used. Who's reviewing you? You don't know. Sometimes they don't know. They just have a stack of them and they need reviewed and somebody reviews them. It's not their job. This is new enough that it's not their job. So the point of the certification is there's no question that you are compliant. It's already on there and you're compliant to the, in this case, I used California, by Clean California standard. Okay. So if you're already compliant to that, that's it. It's certified. It's got the certification mark on it and it's ready to go.
All right. There is one more question from Colin. What is the turnaround for EPDs? How long does it take to create one?
Sure. That depends. We can talk about that offline. It depends on products, how many products, and things like that. So yeah, we could talk about that offline if you'd like.
Thank you again, everyone, for being here. And we hope you enjoyed the webinar. If you have any questions or you want to inquire on how to get started with the carbon footprint program at your company, please feel free to contact Denice or contact QAI at info@qai.org, and we will be more than happy to help you.